Joining us online on Facebook, perhaps on YouTube. YouTube's a little later, but Facebook is live-ish. Depends on our internet connection, but we'd like to welcome everyone here this morning. We're gonna have a good time. It is our annual chili cook-off. I don't know why it's off. It's just first annual. Can you call it an annual if it's the first one? All right, we're doing it anyway. So we're breaking the rules if you can't. So we're just living crazy like that. So we're gonna have a fun day. It's gonna, I don't know, how are we doing judging? We doing the judging like we have Post-it notes? Do we have a ballot? Do we have Dominion voting machines? You can tell by your laughter. Some of you have a good memory. All right. So we are wrapping up a weird series. Okay, so I planned to finish this series on impact, on the impact that the body of Christ has had on the world, and it's just a little different. It's a little different series. And I was talking with a couple people yesterday. I'm like, yeah, I might kill it. I just might kill it now. I don't know. And they said, well, what were you going to wrap it up with? And I told them, and they said, oh, we think you should do it. So if you don't like this, totally not my fault. If you really don't like it, I'll give you the names. Oh, they're volunteering. All right, okay, right back here. I didn't know if you were into this, but if you haven't been here for this, what we're talking about is what would the world look like if there were no Christians, right? We sometimes hear people say, well, you know, the world would be a better place if there just were no Christians, or perhaps even if Jesus had never come. Oh, it's all you religious folks. You know, I agree. The religious folks are sometimes a problem. Come on, somebody, right? But it's all the, churches and preachers and Christians. They're just ruining everything. And so we've taken a few weeks and we've looked at the impact that followers and disciples of Christ have had on the world around us. And I don't even have the words. It is so significant. The world would be a much, much different place had Jesus never come and had there never been disciples that took his words and their discipleship seriously. So I recognize maybe 2 or 3 weeks in, it just sounds like patting on the back and a bragging session, like, Christians are just better than everyone. I don't really mean to make it sound like that, but we are a part of a glorious history and tradition of making the world a better place. Not me, but us and generations of believers that have gone before us. So this morning, because someone else said that I should, see how I'm not taking the credit. That tells you how confident I am in this message. We're going to look at this question and examine the claim. Have you ever heard this claim before? That more people have been killed in the name of Christ than any other name. Can I get a show of hands? Anybody ever heard that statement? If you haven't, that's good. Maybe that's not going around anymore. But yeah, more. I've heard that I don't know how many times. More people have been killed in the name of Christ than any other name. I didn't jot this down. I do want to mention that those that have called themselves Christians throughout history, the track record isn't spotless. We'll touch on it just a little bit later. The track record isn't perfect. It's not as though Christians have never done anything to make things kind of worse, right? We've botched it a few times. But without going into great detail on that, I should be careful to say that a lot of things that were done that were negative in the name of Christ were professing Christians. Like, we would probably take issue whether those people were actually born again disciples of Jesus Christ. So, that argument can be made. We won't get into that. But we'll just say that, our record isn't spotless over the last 2,000 years. We could talk about the Crusades. We could talk about the Inquisition. I'll give you some numbers on some of that stuff briefly in a little bit. What else? I don't know. Witch trials. There have been some things through history. Again, professing Christians, not necessarily people that took the Bible seriously. partially because they couldn't read and didn't know what the Bible said. But I want to begin this morning by taking a look at Psalm 14. This is a psalm of David, and he says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." Anybody ever heard that scripture before? We like that one. That one's kind of fun. Like, it's nice that God gets a little jab in there, right? And we go, there the Bible proves that there's a God, because it says that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. That might not prove that there's a God, but we do like David's attitude, right? And I like that. I like that first part. There's got to be something in there somewhere that just says atheism is a bad idea. But if we continue the verse, there's actually some really important things that follow from that sort of, David's kind of gotcha moment. He says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And we like that, and we kind of stop there. But look what it goes on to say. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. Verse 2, the Lord looks down from heaven on the sons of men to see if there are any who understand or any who seek God. Verse 3, and all have turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. This is, of course, Old Testament passage, David speaking here with Jesus and the infilling of God's Spirit. We do have a new capacity to actually do good and seek God. But David is talking about our sinful nature and how we are corrupt and how, by default, we're not godly people. Someone has said that there is has been no other era in the history of mankind, like the 20th century, in terms of man killing his fellow man. Millions were killed by other human beings in the last century, and that is a conservative estimate. So if you're visiting with us here this morning, I don't try to use a little humor, and I don't try to sort of keep it light because I learned somewhere that that's the best way to grow a church. I sort of do that by default because that's just what my personality is. That's just who I am. I like that. So when this series has kind of been weird for me because we've gone a little dark a few times. Anybody with me? Like the first whole one was like all about death, right? And we're not done yet. So it's gonna get ugly up in here this morning. So I just say that to share with you my uncomfortableness with all the death this morning. If you're visiting with us, I hope you don't go away and go, wow, there was so much death in that sermon this morning. I don't think we'll ever try that place again. This is not typical. But having said that, bring on the death. Okay, here it is. So what we want to look at this morning. So we looked at the contributions that Christians have made, how they value human life. We've been made in God's image, and how before Jesus, life was exceedingly cheap. And I feel like we made a compelling argument that without the arrival of Jesus, it would still be a really, really dark and ugly place. We talked about the contributions that Christians have made as far as their generosity and charity and giving to people, expecting nothing back. Unheard of, really, in the world before Jesus taught his disciples to live that kind of lifestyle. We talked about how Christians, disciples of Christ, have brought civilization and raised the standard of living wherever they have gone. We've got some cool quotes about that this morning, if I can stop talking here and get to them, because they're at the end. So I gotta keep moving. But I want to look at the world or parts of the world that have tried to erase the footprint of Jesus, have tried to erase the influence of the body of Christ. So millions have died because of atheistic ideology, whether it was Hitler, whether it was Mao Zedong, as he attempted to liquidate Christianity in the Cultural Revolution. Now, modern technology has made us more efficient at killing one another, and so science and technology, which we talked about last week, Modern science wouldn't be here without Christianity. That's a shock to some, but now we know better. So modern technology has made us more efficient in killing more people, and so that can partially be responsible for more deaths. But most of the atrocities that, at least that we're going to talk about this morning, the biggest atrocities, I'll put it that way, in the 20th century happened because modern man rejected God. All right? Someone said in the 18th century, the Bible was killed. In the 19th century, God was killed, referring to the philosophers of the day and saying that God was dead. So in the 18th century, the Bible was killed. In the 19th century, God was killed. And in the 20th century, man was killed. You get rid of the Bible and you get rid of God, then it gets pretty ugly for mankind. So wherever atheism has had a stranglehold on the world, there is a negative impact. So remember, we asked the question at the beginning, or we talked about the statement. There have been more bloodshed, more lives lost in the name of Christ than anywhere else in the world. And we're going to find out if that's really true this morning. You can probably guess where this is going. I'm going to tell you this. I didn't jot this down on my notes, but a memory stirs of a time that I was talking with someone about the things of the Lord, and this came up. And I've heard it a number of times in my life, but after I studied some of the things that we're gonna talk about this morning, somebody brought this up. And let me just say, it's probably partially due to my still fallen and sinful nature, but it was quite enjoyable to be able to have this information at the ready when someone spewed out that old platitude that more blood has been spilled in the name of Christ than any other name. And as I recounted some of these, not of course by memory, but some of the ideas, this individual, I mean, the countenance changed as they realized I've believed a lie that so much blood has been spilled in the name of Christ. Some has by his so-called believers. Proverbs 23:7 says, as he thinks in his heart, so is he. So the way that we think, the things we focus on, the things that we dwell on, they have a way of coming out in our lives. Our lifestyles will reveal the kind of things that we think about. Now, I know most of the dumb things that I've done, I didn't think enough. Come on, somebody. Now, if you said amen, that was for you. You weren't just amening the dumb things that I did. But right. So what we think about ends up very often manifesting in our lives. And so if we remove the scriptures and we remove God and we remove spirituality and there's no constraints, there's nothing to guide us as we think in our hearts, that's what we become. That's who we are. As people think in their hearts, that's the kind of world that they will live in. We are the results from our thinking. And our greatest results flow from our thinking about the things of God. Consequences flow from unbelief and disbelief in God and godly living. Someone said it this way: when a person denies the existence of God, he finds himself suddenly in a materialistic universe. The atheist has dichotomized the universe, gotten rid of the spiritual half, and has been left with only the material universe, which is nothing but matter in motion. Now, I want to say, and I've said this a number of times, but this is not to say that every atheist that you know is going to stab you in the back, not figuratively, literally. They're going to get you if you better watch those atheist friends of yours, you know. They're all unspeakably evil, okay? We're not saying that. Are you with me this morning? Yeah. I know some lovely atheists. I know some fine atheists. Sometimes an atheist is someone who just doesn't happen to buy it. They just don't happen to buy it. They're not, all desirous of exterminating all Christianity. They're not all wanting to get into debates and make you look silly and superstitious for believing in the big man in the sky. In fact, I've shared with many of you some of the people that I follow, the books that I read, and some of the videos that I watch. Some of the people that I respect a great deal, I can't say this in church, never mind. You're not mature enough to handle it, I don't think. I see Connor back there nodding. I'm like, dude, you got to check this guy. I love it when an atheist agrees with me. I love it when an atheist says, we need morals, we need constraints. And I love it when an atheist said, it's really good that religion came along, because religion gave people something to center their lives around, form a community, and build the great civilizations, and have brought us to this place of living and elevated living, because people had a common thing that they centered themselves around. And even some atheists that I know of say, thank God for religion. Those might be my words, not theirs. But can appreciate religion. Jonathan Haidt is a great guy if you want to check him out. A fine fellow. He just doesn't happen to believe. But as I've got several of his books, and he recounts a number of different things, and I'm like, I agree with that. All but the not believing in God part. I don't believe in that part. But how we should treat each other well, how we should give people grace, and things of that nature. I don't know that he uses the word grace. That might be the Christian word for it. But good guy, Camille Paglia, who's a little crazy in some ways, says that I don't happen to believe in God, but I read the Bible. It's a beautiful piece of literature. I read it as literature, and it's a shame that the people who actually believe in God don't read it more. So the idea that your Christian friends are reading the Bible more than you, that stings a bit. But the idea that Camille Paglia, the atheist, reads the Bible more than you, that smarts, right? So I'm not saying that all atheists are horrible people. But what I do want to give you is something of a history of atheism, and let's really see if it's true that there's been more bloodshed in the name of Christ than in the name of nothing. So David, we started with David in Psalm 41. He said that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And then he goes on to say that they are corrupt. Their deeds are vile, and there is no one who does good. The book of Judges, you'll be familiar with a number of times. It says that in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit. In other words, there was no moral constraints. There was no leadership. There was nothing exterior that was guiding and leading people to live moral lives. And I think that's David's point here when he says that they are corrupt, their deeds are vile, and there is no one who does good. Because without some moral constraints, we're a mess. We are a mess. There is literally no reason for you to live a moral life if there's no God. I've heard some arguments that say, well, it's better to get along. Like maybe there's no God, but we still shouldn't be murderers, and we still should. If we're not a government that would enforce those kinds of laws, it would make the world a nicer place. I think you're borrowing some ideas from Christianity, even if you take that view, because if there's no God, then there's no reason to be moral, and there's no reason to be kind to anyone. There's kind atheists. We're all, I don't want to be misunderstood here. There's some fine, lovely folks that are atheists. They need Jesus. Anybody with me? All right? They need Jesus. So I'm not saying that they're all corrupt, but really, if you follow the thinking, there's really no reason for me to, maybe I'll pretend to be nice, but the moment I have an opportunity, I'm going to get you. I'm just waiting for my chance. And whatever I need to do to you or anyone else to get ahead, it's totally justifiable, because why not? I'm glad that everyone who doesn't believe in God doesn't live that way. Again, as we've stated, I think for these full 5 weeks, that they may be borrowing something from Christianity, as some atheists that I've mentioned already will freely admit that the world is a better place because Christians, they might say religion, maybe not narrow it down to just Christians, but that religion is good. It's better for the world. The world is a better place because of it. So if atheists can understand that, then we should probably have some understanding of the difference that we've made in the world around us. All right. So is it true that more people have been killed in the name of Christ Friends, I think I've let the cat out of the bag already. I accidentally skipped ahead in my notes, and you probably already know that there are far more that have been killed in the name of atheism than in the name of Christianity. The numbers killed by atheists totally dwarf the number of those killed by professing Christians. Someone pointed out that the term genocide didn't even exist until the 20th century. How could you commit genocide? Well, we had the ability to at least give it the good old college try. All right, Joseph Stalin slaughtered more than, we got numbers people, so I'm not a numbers person, but you'll probably be running the totals in your head as we go. Stalin killed more than 40 million people. Now, the entire Inquisition, which is, we could talk about that. I'm not going to defend the Inquisition this morning. We'll just, take the blame for it, I suppose. But the entire Inquisition was reported to have killed 30,000. Now, 30,000, that's, let's see, still 30,000 more people than I've killed. All right? Look at the preacher bragging. Look at him. Oh, the preacher, you're so good. You haven't killed anybody. Ooh. 30,000 is a big number, right? 30,000 is a lot. That's a lot of people. Inquisition, about 30,000. But let's keep this in perspective. 30,000 you can lay at the feet of Christians, and we'll do some other math here in a minute. But it's generally agreed upon that Stalin killed somewhere around 40 million people. Of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Adolf. He killed Jews, of course, gypsies, most of whom were professing Christians, Slavs, Poles, and others deemed racially inferior. The first victims of the Holocaust, here, I'll have a quiz for you here in just a minute. The first victims of the Holocaust were 70,000 of the mentally ill, or what they deemed incurable people. Now here, you can help me kind of finish this statement. At that time, which was really what Hitler had done, really began with euthanasia. We'll just, kill the people that are weak and having trouble and the mentally ill. The only courageous public voice against the killing of the mentally ill came from, can you guess? Right. Actually, this came from, I didn't check this out, but I read this from a good source, came from 2 Christian leaders. Maybe we shouldn't just kill people because they're having mental problems. All right? 2 Christian leaders. I feel like that number should be higher. I feel like there should be more. But at least there were 2, right? So the Holocaust actually began with euthanasia. By the end, 6 million Jews and 9 to 10 million others. Many were Christians, were liquidated. No one knows for sure the exact number of Gentiles. And then we get to China. It's estimated that Mao Zedong alone killed more than 70 million Chinese. And then I've got this broken down when he did it. I don't think that's necessary this morning. We'll save a little time and cut those details. But about 70, I've got he did this group during this period and so forth. But if I may, 70 million Chinese people murdered under Mao Zedong. Did I mention we're having a party today? Hooray. Nothing makes you feel like partying, like the death. Okay. So there's, math. We get to about 72 million human beings from Mao Zedong. By the way, Hitler, godless. Mao Zedong, atheist. Stalin, godless, atheist. And then there's the communist takeover in Cambodia. That was only said to kill about 2 or 3 million innocent people. And then there's really no way to count all the numbers that were slaughtered in other communist, atheist revolutions and communist-sponsored wars. So you got Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Cuba, Czechoslovakia. Can I get a shout for Czechoslovakia? Yes. Anybody from Czechoslovakia here this morning? All right, hey, we have one from Czechoslovakia. Right? How often do you put Czechoslovakia in the notes of your sermon and your buddy from Czechoslovakia shows up? We didn't plan that. All right. Hungary, Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and numerous other nations around the world. Okay, around the world. I got to stick to my notes because I'll get my numbers wrong if I don't. So Mao killed about 72 million, 40 by Stalin. Hitler's 15. It's hard to say for sure. We come up to a number around 127 million people, and so then with other atheistic totalitarian states, we can safely round that up to 130. And where I got this information from, the atheist numbers are conservative, right? They're pretty like, it's not. And I think I jotted this down. Those that supposedly were killed by Christians, those numbers are rounded up. They're like the most liberal figuring of the numbers. I hope I included that here this morning. All right, so if we were to add the dead from the wars of the 20th century, the number would easily jump. Okay, so then you have to add the people in the wars. That like Hitler killed all those innocent people, his own people, but then there was that World War II thing that happened. So if you add the innocent people that they killed, in addition to the wars, we get the number of about 170 million. All right, but we can take out the war stuff and going by this author here, and we'll just stick with the 130 million figure. All right, I better read this or I'm going to botch it. All right, using the most exaggerated criteria and numbers, one could come up with no more than 17 million people killed. 17 million people killed by professing Christians. Still a big number. 17 million. 17 million. Not proud of that. But I want to tell the whole story. In the name of Christ, in the 20 centuries of Christian history. So even though I read it, I still botched it. So let me go back. 17 million have been killed by professing Christians in the name of Christ since Christ. 17 million. I'm not dismissing that number. But in 2,000 years, people who claim to be Christians botched it 17 million times, right? But over 2,000 years. So when compared to the top estimate of 17 million allegedly killed in the name of Christ, we see a huge difference in the estimate of 130 million killed by atheist communist regimes in the last century. Over 2,000 years, 17 million, large estimate. Conservative estimate, the totalitarian regimes killed 130 million in just 100 years. That's 8 times more the number of people killed in a much, much shorter period of time. I want to jump back to this idea, Psalm 14, where David seems to suggest that if there is no God, corruption and negative things follow that. And just this morning I said, I'm going to take a look at this. I'd heard about this new bill that's being proposed in Canada. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. So Canada already has, I don't recall the name of it, but it's an assisted suicide law. Now you can go back and look at the last 4 weeks, and I don't need to re-preach that for you. You already know what we would have to say about that. Christians have always stood on the side of life. And the new bill or the addition or the expansion of their suicide bill. So presently, it is if you are terminally ill and you're suffering from something that there is no cure for, and you're just in awful, debilitating, horrible pain, and there's no end in sight. Canada has said, you know what, we're gonna pass legislation that will allow you to commit suicide with the assistance of a physician. So the expansion is for mental illness. And so I read some neutral stuff. I read some stuff against. And one article that I read, not even intentionally, might have almost just been pro or just fair. And man, it's just weird. And so with mental illness, you can get to, it could be the homeless, it could be those that are poor, folks that are having a problem, and it can even extend to, there's no age limit on it. So even, I forget the term that they use, like mature teens or older teenagers are, would be covered or allowed under this expansion of this legislation to have physician-assisted suicide, all without the knowledge or without the knowledge of the parents. So you have a child who's depressed. How many of you know depression and anxiety going up all over the world? It's not just here. And they're an older teen. I don't know what the cutoff would be. But without a parent's permission. Now, what's weird is I read stories about parents that actually signed off. Like the one young man I think I read was, I think he was like in his early 20s, might have been 21 or something, but he suffered from depression and he was lonely, thought he would never get a girlfriend. Somebody said, I don't know if it's the same guy, but one younger man said, I don't think I will ever have anyone to love me. And he wasn't even talking about romantically, just like nobody loves me. And that is indeed sad. But even a young person doesn't need their parents' permission to go and have a physician assist them in taking their own lives. That's what Canada is getting ready to allow. Now, this is going to sound like a joke. It's not. It's kind of weird. Fortunately, the healthcare in Canada is so bad, the waiting list is so atrocious that if you decide to kill yourself, it might be years before a physician is found available. I guess we can be thankful about the state-sponsored healthcare in Canada as a result. That's not me making a political joke. That is what I read about their system. And I read the story of one young woman who has suicidal ideation, thinks about suicide quite frequently, but she's afraid of it, and she's terrified. And she's like, she doesn't want this law to pass because she's afraid that she will use that law to end her own life. It's like the fact that it's not allowed under her present condition, although she thinks about it frequently, she can resist the temptation knowing that there's not physician assisted that would be available to her. And so she's terrified that this law will go into effect, and it probably will, that she will take advantage of it. I believe, I didn't jot this down, but I think it was her story, and she said it was something like she was trying to get psychological help and counseling and see a therapist about these suicidal thoughts, but she was like a year out from getting the help that she needs and the counseling for someone to say maybe suicide is not the answer. So she can't get help, but she'll probably have to wait in a long line if she decides to have a physician help her with her suicide as well. And young people, the wait for a therapist is even longer. And what's really dark and ugly about this is that it seems like, I mean, I want to be fair, but it seems like this may be being done because there's already such a burden on their healthcare system. Like if you are helping someone with their mental health from the time they're a young person and through their 20s and 30s, and like that's going to add up, that's expensive. And it seems to be the case that it's cheaper for the government-sponsored healthcare to help you kill yourself than the cost of trying to get you healthy in your mind and help you with what you're struggling with. A fool says in his heart, there is no God. And what does David go on to say? That they are corrupt, their deeds are vile, and there is no one who does good. Without some moral constraints on us, things devolve rapidly. And if you're shocked by my Canada story, that's good, that's healthy, that's because whether you're a Christian or not this morning, you've probably, if it shocks you, you've probably been influenced by Christian culture or a culture that has at least been influenced by Christianity. All right, let me share with you this quote. So more than a century ago, James Russell Lowell, a great literary man who was the Minister of State for the United States to England, was at a banquet where Christianity was being attacked and scoffers were mocking Christianity. He spoke up and said, and this quote in a way, and I know you all haven't been here for the series, some of you are like, well, thank goodness for that. But they were mocking Christianity at this banquet that he attended. And he famously stood up and said these words. And this, in many ways, summarizes the last 4 weeks. He said, I challenge any skeptic to find a 10 square mile spot on this planet where they can live their lives in peace and safety and decency, where womanhood is honored, where infancy and old age are revered, where they can educate their children, where the gospel of Jesus Christ has not gone first to prepare the way. I want to read that one more time, because for emphasis, but also because I didn't do it very well the first time. He said, I challenge any skeptic to find a 10 square mile spot on this planet where they can live their lives in peace and safety and decency, where womanhood is honored, where infancy and old age are revered, and where they can educate their children, where the gospel of Jesus Christ has not gone first to prepare the way. If they find such a place, he went on, then I would encourage them to emigrate thither and there proclaim their unbelief. Doesn't that kind of summarize what we've been talking about the last several weeks? It's easy in the safety and the comfort that in so many ways Christianity is responsible for. By the way, those of you that are visiting or just tuning in, I didn't say every good thing was invented by a Christian, right? You can kind of give that impression. Like, it's not as though Christians are the only ones that ever do anything around here, right? So I didn't say that, but monumental, extraordinary, huge leaps forward. We're not, the only people valuable on the planet to God, right? And so we're not suggesting that. But what we are saying is that many folks borrow from our belief system, borrow from our values, then judge us as not meeting the standard that they're borrowing from us. And in reality, and I think we've shown that had it not been for the influence of Jesus and his disciples, the world would be a much, much different place. And so with that, I want to encourage you to vote on November the 8th. That is this Tuesday. There are some important things on the ballot. I want to encourage you to prayerfully consider. So, I've run this through in my head. Nobody has said this. But should we be political in the pulpit? That's a question that I've gone back and forth on that in life. I've been political in the pulpit, and then I've stepped away from it. I still believe that if we back a political party or individual, it's going to embarrass us, right? If I back a human, they'll always embarrass me. Jesus has never embarrassed me. So, but issues are worthy of speaking about. So, Prop 1, I have views. They're political. I'm not going to share them. Prop 2, I have views on that, but they're political. Figure that out, right? It's not a moral issue. So I feel strongly, but I'm not going to burden you with that. One reason is I think I'm right, but since it's a political thing, who knows? I'm right, just so you know. That was just, I'm just, Prop 3 is a moral issue. And so it would enshrine what appears to be limitless or broad abortion in our Constitution. I first mentioned this weeks ago, and said, look, you may be in the place and you may be pro-choice. I'm not saying that you need to be pro-life. I'm just saying this thing is sketchy, scary, it's poorly written, it's confusing, and I believe it is a Pandora's box that can get ugly. So I would encourage you to prayerfully, I need to say prayerfully, because prayerfully consider whether God would have you, if God's even interested, I submit to you that he is, if God would say, you ought to go vote for abortion on demand with no limits and for no age limits, no parental consent, just the most broad abortion, I've heard some people say in the world, I don't know if that's true. But it would certainly make abortion more, it's available, the word. For those of you that are pro-life, it would be worse than when we were under Roe v. Wade. The way I understand it, I think it's dangerous for the women that go in for abortions as well. The sanitary standards and the rules and inspections to make sure that a place is clean and safe, there's none of that in this Constitution. So that could be ugly for the pro-choice people as well. So I encourage you just to pray about it. And I will also just add, don't forget to pray to vote for your school board, folks, too. Huh? Wink. If you think I'm not going to remind you about the school board when my wife is running for school board, you're silly. You're just being silly now. I didn't tell you to vote for her. I just said you might want to prayerfully consider. I'm still, I'm on the fence, but she's starting to win me over. I've asked for bribes, but I'm probably going to vote for her. So Tuesday, November the 8th. All right. All right, God bless you. I'm going to ask, is Kenny coming up? Kenny is going to come up and minister and